Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have only 25 minutes to go through about 52 days worth of material. So I'm going to just do some introductory remarks very quickly, and then we're going to turn it over to James Staten for some more slides, in case you haven't seen enough slides between me and him. And then Dave Temkin will join us kind of for a roundtable, okay? So without further ado, the topic is sort of evolving architectures as we've moved from the cloud to now the edge and the fog. And so do not be alarmed. There is some math here, but there's no test at the end. This is all for Peter Coffey, who I see in the audience. So the first thing is I've written extensively about this, and I want to talk just quickly about an evolution from sort of my first book, Cloudonomics, which delved into some of the math involved in cloud, in particular public versus private. And then from that, I evolved to digital strategy. And from that, I've got a book coming out in a couple of weeks with Professor Yang and a couple of other professorial co-authors or co-editors. It's too expensive, so I don't really recommend that you buy it, but I'm going to cover the material here anyway. I want to start briefly with Cloudonomics, and a few years ago I identified what was a critical issue, which was the trade-offs between centralized hyperscale architectures and highly dispersed architectures. People like to talk about latency, and yes, there is a latency angle to it, but even that is more complicated than you would think. In addition to that, though, there are many other trade-offs that I'm going to get into. The big impact that everyone here is concerned about, of course, is 5G, which makes latency sort of a more dramatic, more interesting thing to focus on, and it's fundamentally changing overall architectures. Lots of technologies involved. Take your photo of this or contact me later, and I'll send it to you if the picture didn't come out. But the point is that lots of advanced technology. I frankly think it's overhyped, but it's just continuing the evolutionary curve of technology, so it's wonderful. And the main thing is that it means that we're moving away from a notion of sort of, again, these centralized, consolidated facilities, and very few of them, to a much more distributed architecture. People sort of sometimes use edge and fog interchangeably, but really the idea is that at the very top layer I have consolidated facilities, and I'm just going to call that cloud because people talk about edge clouds, which is like jumbo shrimp. And then at the other end, you've got devices, which are either user devices like smartphones and smart TVs, or things in the IoT. In my view, what connects to those devices is the edge, and anything in between that is the fog. There's lots of thorny computational problems that arise as to where do I locate microservices and apps at various levels of that architecture. How do I deal with intermittent connectivity? How do I deal with reliable message passing? And so it's certainly a rich area for research, and also it becomes interesting for those of you that are commercializing this area. It also has strategic implications because I talk about, in digital disciplines, the evolution of what used to be simply called operational excellence to information excellence. In other words, using IT to optimize a variety of processes, asset utilization, and the organizational structures around that. The main point there is that in a world of IoT, I can do a lot better job optimizing assets and optimizing processes. The second thing is the evolution from standalone products to smart digital connected products. And this also lets us enter a world of platforms and ecosystems. You can think about Nike Plus or the Alexa Echo ecosystem. I have heterogeneous products that are in a constellation with perhaps a unifying architecture, and that's all relevant. The third thing is what I can do in terms of improved customer relationships. So what Netflix does, for example, with their recommender, which we're all familiar with, and works flawlessly, probably because they have over 1,000 engineers working on it, is an example of that. As we move into, for example, in healthcare, a world of wearables and implantables and so forth, we can think about being able to collect all that data and kind of rising it up through the fog, either to the cloud or processing it at the edge. And then it also enables us to collect lots of data to accelerate our innovation process, which James was just talking about earlier today. So 5G obviously has lots of applications. Put simply, it doesn't even have to be that great. If it's a little bit better than 4G, that's wonderful. And basically, any mobile application by default will be 5G. But then, of course, there's fixed wireless, enhanced mobile broadband, and all the other applications that get into either high reliability, low latency, et cetera. So what I did is I updated the 10 laws of Cloudonomics, which at least one person here, namely me, has heard of, to the laws of Fogonomics. And I was the cloud computing editor for IEEE Cloud Computing Magazine for its entire 5 or 6 year life. So this is just like a cute, not completely tongue-in-cheek because there's math behind it. But what it comes down to is the notion that there really are these insoluble trade-offs between do I consolidate or do I disperse? There is no perfect answer, and as I wrote a few years ago, the optimal solution is what I call the hybrid multi-cloud fog. It's a hybrid of private and public due to cost optimization issues, all other things being equal. Since Dave is kind enough to be here from Netflix, everyone says Netflix is the poster child for cloud adoption. It isn't. Netflix is the poster child, sorry to speak for you, Dave, for everything before you hit play goes into the cloud. So media transcoding, recommendation engines, and things like that. But everything after you hit play, as many of you know, is done through their OpenConnect appliance, which is deployed in colo facilities to be very close to the edge. And there are some reasons for that. I don't have time to go into all of these because James will kill me. And he's in much better shape than I am, so I won't address all of these things. But just to give you a sense, people talk about, oh, 5G and the edge are great for latency. Yes, it's great for latency for round-trip transactions at the edge, like V2X communications, vehicle to roadway, vehicle to vehicle, and so forth. It's not so great if you have an enormous data set that's sitting in the cloud. Obviously, you want to run all those microservices up in the cloud where the data is. There are some other effects that I'll just get into. Sorry about the math, but I just want to show you this topic gets interesting. If I have a lot of time-varying demands that are workloads that are, I can model them, for example, with a normal distribution or what have you, but the point is they're independent. Then when I aggregate them, I get a statistical smoothing effect, which, as we can see, if you think about the utilization of a particular room in your house versus the kind of utilization that a large hotel gets, especially doing dynamic pricing to optimize occupancy, you get that effect in real life. Same thing happens in the cloud. That in turn leads to other effects. So for example, the higher utilization, the fewer wasted resources, therefore the lower the delivered cost of these things. And here's some math, we can talk about it later, but the basic idea is that there are all these trade-offs when I disperse resources. What happens is I have very low utilization of those resources, right? When I aggregate them, then I can have a lower overhead and I end up being much more cost effective. So that's an example of a trade-off that is relevant to consider. So without further ado, my main point was just to say there's a lot of interesting stuff here. There is no easy answer, and if I can leave you with one notion, it's the idea of the hybrid multi-cloud fog, and the reason for it, multiple clouds due to either workflow enablement or due to real-time price optimization, hybrid of private and public for a variety of reasons, and a hybrid of highly consolidated and centralized and widely dispersed. Lots of implications. For example, if you were here for Sarah Bach's opening statement or keynote earlier, you can see that there are lots of implications on a much denser interconnection architecture. So the Equinix Global Interconnection Index actually shows that interconnection bandwidth growth is growing twice as fast as internet traffic growth. And the reason for that is this high degree of dispersion that's occurring. Okay? With that, let me turn it over to James, and I'm going to start walking while you start talking.
Okay. And I want to fill you more in on edge computing and help you really understand how it is different than cloud computing and how we've been using technology analysis for so many years. The key aspects of edge computing that is so important to you paying attention to is the ability to deliver real-time and close to real-time insights, not just based on IoT sensor information, but also for mobile device engagement, in a retail office instead of just at your corporate headquarters. And you do want to take the insights and capabilities that you can get at the edge, and you want to not just focus on just the real-time insights that happen when you've got edge computing right in the edge network, exactly where all of those devices are and where they're being collected. But you want to be able to move them up into edge gateways where you can aggregate data across the edge networks, integrate data that came from the cloud or came from your data center so that you can get insights and capabilities that are a chapter beyond real time. Because real time is great for some very quick insights, but you do want to be able to follow that up with additional guidance, additional insights, and then of course you do want to move the rest of the data back up into the cloud so you can do longer term analysis and aggregation of this information. One thing you also want to be thinking about here is beyond collecting and analyzing the data as articulated on here, you want to be thinking also about how can the insights that we find from all this be empowering to our ecosystem as well, not just to our company. And that is where in edge computing and in 5G, we're seeing significant investments in capabilities to allow you to securely share access to this data so additional insights and additional visibility can come through. And it's not the old-fashioned way where you put the data into the edge gateway devices as you see on here, and suddenly everybody can access that. If you go down that path, be prepared for the city governments that you're in to be very unhappy with you. Be prepared for everybody to break GDPR. What you want to do instead is store the information in there, take advantage of 5G networks when you move it up to the cloud or you move it into other locations. Make sure that the data is encrypted and fully protected. And when you want to share it with people, have them do API queries with artificial intelligence. That way you only have to give back the results based on the query they had, and you can limit the fields of data, the volume of data that goes through there. And if that still empowers your ecosystem, empowers governments, and empowers others to see the values that come from your edge computing and carry it to the next level, that is where we will heavily transform the values that we're achieving through IoT, CDNs, data aggregation, and the power that we get from faster networks like 5G. Now, as we look at which vertical markets are investing in edge computing and are seeing these achievements, what you see on here, the top section in yellow, these are the organizations who are already implementing and putting in place edge computing solutions today. The next two sections below are the people who is the percentage of people within these vertical markets who said they are going to be investing in this in 2020. And that is what has become so critical. A lot of people think that edge computing is not going to really take off until 2025, but now that we have so many 5G networks that have started to put their position in place, now that we're seeing most of the edge computing services are being available as a service, more and more organizations are saying, oh wow, I didn't know I could get this value and I could apply it to so many more cities now than I ever thought I could for so much more cost-effective delivery. And that is what is a big driver in these vertical markets that you see. And as I mentioned before about ecosystem empowerment, these edge systems are not being limited just to these vendors or just to these verticals. A really good example, the investments you see in healthcare, which is a very significant desired investment in 2020. They are, of course, not just keeping this information in hospitals, but they are sharing it with insurance firms. They're sharing it with government agencies and others to really drive consumer health to the next level. And as we look at where edge computing can be put in place, there are more use cases and more values than what might seem natural. If we think about residences as a simple example, a lot of organizations have said, let's do edge computing in the residence so that we can optimize their use of their energy system, so that they don't have to have the power turned on when no one is in the house. Well, that's one of the values for sure. But what you also want to look at is what additional empowerments can I provide? And obviously, several good examples of this will cross over with some of the other scenarios. As you see the next one down listed as cities, which of course governments and smart cities. Well, governments don't want to have their smart city initiative just protecting the roads. They want to protect their citizens. And if there are criminals that are getting lost because they're not on the roads where the city's cameras are catching them and then collecting that data, if you have cameras at your house and that criminal shows up, wouldn't it be nice if the city knew about that and the police came by and they saved your family's life? That's how you want to be thinking about edge computing, is which of the scenarios where you see it being deployed, what are the use cases, what are the follow-on use cases, and is listed in the third element here, what companies and what industries should I partner with to achieve these objectives? And it's through these partnerships that I'm going to get the great values, but also where I'm going to be able to provide innovations and net new values that expand my company's value and the benefits I get from edge.
So that's a great lead into Netflix. So Dave, we've spoken a lot and shown slides. So maybe you could talk about exactly what Netflix is doing. And James, why don't you sit down and you can kind of give us a view as to, we've talked about abstractly, what are your actual plans? My suspicion is that that media and entertainment vertical that James put up, that you're in that 3% that actually knows what they're doing and ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that we know what we're doing. I think that's a fair bet. In our case, so it's interesting. You know, we come to PTC, we come to events like this, and hear things like edge computing, 5G, so on and so forth. And you know, we think about how can we use these new technologies and where are they most applicable. And you know, one of the interesting things is when everyone comes to us with, say, 5G, they're like, oh, well, you know, this is going to unlock so much bandwidth, so much more potential for your product. And when I think about that, I go, you know what? I want to make sure that our product works really well, whether you've got 3G or 5G. And you know, while to your point, exactly what you said, it's going to unlock additional bandwidth. Hopefully, that just solves a lot of the contention issues in busy networks. But where it is super interesting for me is actually on the production side of the house. So as we're making content, one of the biggest challenges we face is you can be making content, say, in Mumbai, but you may have the producers or other creatives sitting in London. And a big priority for them is being able to see the content either as it's being made or that evening, you know, a process called dailies. And today, quite often, people are still, you know, the thing that blew my mind when I started coming into this space and learning more about it was that they're still writing this stuff to LTO tape and putting LTO tapes in the back of a van and driving that van to the airport and loading those LTO tapes onto a cargo flight or a commercial flight and then taking them wherever they need to be post-processed. We need to fix that. And that's not a problem unique to Netflix. It was a surprise to me that a company like Netflix still does that, but that's the way all content production still works. So hopefully that unlocks that.
Well, what are you thinking of in terms of specifically millimeter wave? The good news is that you've got high bandwidth. The bad news is that you have a limited footprint for the foreseeable future.
Wait, I put up my hand now, my millimeter wave isn't working anymore. That's one of my concerns exactly, is that I don't see it as the kind of durable technology we're going to need it to be to really widely deploy it from our perspective, and we're hoping that the carriers figure it out.
You mean on the production side?
Yes.
In particular, right?
Yes.
And James, as far as you deal with lots of clients, so media and entertainment is one vertical. In terms of this new thinking about architecture that's kind of creating these hybrids all over, what are you seeing as particularly interesting or noteworthy?
Well, what's most particularly interesting is where they are not simply just doing IoT, but they are also thinking about edge computing and how it can empower the integration between our mobile apps, our web apps, and the devices and the IoT sensors that we gather together, so that I can give great experiences, not just to the equipment that's there, but also to the people that are interacting with them, whether they're employees or whether they are citizens. But that also I can protect this data, because very much as you've mentioned in your industry, when we're filming 4K video, we don't want the 4K video to be intercepted by other people until we have brought it together as a full capability. But more and more content in the entertainment industry needs to be assessed right away. Did we capture all these scenes correctly? Did we get this wrong? Do these actors need to move in different positions? And if we can empower these people, not just with their mobile devices, but with smart glasses, for example, suddenly we can improve these circumstances, which makes the efficiency of doing the filming way better.
So if there's any questions from the audience, I always like incorporating the audience if possible. It's hard to see, but raise your hand if you have a burning question that you have like two of the greatest minds in the universe right here, and a few more in the audience too. So, Disruptive Dean.
Yeah, I just want to ask the panel whether they really think that 5G is the thing that's going to drive edge. If edge computing is such a big deal, surely the fixed edge would have been around for 10 years or more already, or 4G. And also, most indoor devices use Wi-Fi. I just think that this 5G to edge link seems to be overdone. Can you justify it, please?
I'm not going to justify it. I agree with you.
Counter opposing view, because I agree with Dave, so I can't.
Yeah, but what's important is for people to understand what additional capabilities, functionalities, and depth of data can 5G now empower. I should not be thinking that only 5G allows me to do this, but it's does 5G create net new values, net new capabilities, and allows us to really take our edge efforts and our customer experience efforts to the next level.
So I think it's fair to say that 5G is great, mostly because it's the next wave of mobility, and mobility is great, so what's wrong with that? But that some things are overhyped. So for example, the 10 to 20 gig peak data rates don't represent congested network average throughput. The 5 millisecond end-to-end latency, it's a very small end-to-end in the radio access network, not the entirety. But the point is that it certainly brings attention more than we've seen traditionally, and some momentum just around thinking about these more holistic hybrid architectures. We have a question back there.
Yeah, Dave. Oh, sorry, that was very loud. Dave, when you talk about the edge compute in relation to production and post-production, are you only trying to solve for where people are in London or wherever in an office trying to get their dailies up? Or are you talking about people in the field shooting too, in which case that edge compute would need to be mobile?
That is a great question and a great point. So when I look at what edge compute consists of today, there's not a big interest from us. There's not a ton of value. By the time you've gotten from the location where the shoot is happening to some edge compute node, say in a tier 3, tier 4 city somewhere, you've solved the hardest network problem, which is getting it off-site into a data center. From that location to a more centralized location is easy and has long since been solved. And so there's no latency advantage by doing that transcoding, to your point, at that edge compute location. So from my perspective, I have two places of interest where I can think about transcoding adding a lot of value. It is, to your exact point, on set, on location, because if I think about what an 8K video stream looks like, and we are shooting content in 8K today, we're not delivering in 8K, but we're shooting it, that's, I believe, 12.5 gigabits per second uncompressed. 5G is not going to solve for that, and even fiber will absolutely solve for that, but you can't always run fiber to the Amazon jungle where we shoot stuff on location. And so the ability to transcode something either quickly or on the fly on location to go from 8K down to a daily, which doesn't even need to be HD, so you can get offset or off location very quickly, that's really important to us. And so being able to deliver that quickly, whether it's over 3G, 4G, or 5G, is key. And if I can't do it there, then I might as well be doing it in AWS.
And to be fair, there are other media and entertainment use cases besides the Netflix model,
100%.
right? So you can think about user-generated content. You can think about some of these sort of dynamic, three-dimensional type of sort of, whatever you call it, a moving display where kind of you're leveraging hundreds or thousands of individual users who might have micropayments to collect an image or video, and kind of the end user then stitches together that scene. So lots of different scenarios, lots of different exciting opportunities around this. It's been a pleasure talking with you, but we're out of time. So thank you to my wonderful guests here.
Thank you.